Hello everybody, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. It's been a little minute, but I'm back, and today I have a new camera to talk about, the Fujifilm GFX100RF. I'll do a little bit of an intro here, I'll give some disclaimers, we'll talk about the specs, we'll talk about all the things, we'll talk about the camera, using the camera, and we'll talk about some photos, obviously. So that's what we're going to do in this video. I'll leave chapter markers down below. If you have questions about the camera that I don't answer in here, please leave a comment down below and I'll do my best to answer those. So let's start at the beginning. How did I get access to this camera? Well, I was in the right place at the right time. I work at Kenmore Camera in Kenmore, Washington, one of two large camera stores in the Seattle area, which is a very neat thing to have. So we got access to the camera for about a week. I actually probably spent more time photographing the camera than photographing with the camera. And I don't have the camera with me right now. So I can't show it to you directly, but through the magic of discovering a product photography and video turntable at the camera store, I present this. So here is the Fujifilm GFX100RF, Fujifilm's first fixed lens rangefinder GFX camera. So as you can see, it looks like it's inspired by the X100, and it has the sensor from the GFX100S2. So it's this neat combination of things going on here. Again, a couple other disclosures. I was loaned this camera through Fujifilm because I work at Kenmore Camera. This is not a sponsored video. I did make a video for the camera store. That's because I'm the Fujifilm nerd there, and I enjoy making videos about new Fujifilm products. So that's how little old me got access to this kind of cool and fun camera. So I'll share a whole bunch of thoughts, as I mentioned, and we'll start with the specs here, and then we'll work our way through. So first in the specs, we have some basic specs. So as I mentioned earlier, this is a 102 megapixel large format sensor, which is shared with the GFX100S2. That sensor has a little bit slower readout than the sensor that's in the GFX100 the second. So that's one of the differences between those two camera bodies. It does have a fixed lens. It's a 35mm f4. This is a new lens as far as I'm aware, and has not been available in previous GFX camera systems. The battery is the W235, so that's the bigger battery that is shared with like the XH2 series, XT5, as well as the GFX100 series. So that's nice to have. It's got two memory card slots. They're dual SD UHS-2, and then the price is $48.99 US, if I remember correctly. I couldn't find for sure in my documentation what the exact retail price is, so if it's different, I will leave it in the description below. Next, let's talk about size and weight. This is the smallest and lightest, as far as I'm aware, of the GFX series cameras. So the width is 5¼ inches, height is 3½ inches, depth is about 1¾ inches with just the body, 3 inches with the lens. This camera does come with a square lens hood, as well as a filter attachment that you have to use to attach the lens hood. It also includes a clear filter to give it some weather resistance. So with that lens hood, there it is even a little bit deeper, which again looks like this. So 4¼ inches deep with the lens hood. The weight's 1.6 pounds, 735 grams. It's a little hard to know what all that means, so let me give you perspective. We had a X100VI in the store, a used one, so I lined them up and here we go. So this is the height and width difference. As you can see, the GFX100RF is much more square. Some of the comments made in the store when we got the first chance to look at it is it reminds us a little bit of the Instax Wide. It's got a little bit of that vibe, that design language and feeling. Another perspective look here to show the depth difference. And again, the depth difference here, and then one last one to show the depth difference. So the GFX100RF is not that big when you consider all that's going on there with that 100 megapixel sensor. So that's kind of cool. Next up, let's talk about file sizes. For 102 megapixel 16-bit RAW, I have not photographed with a GFX camera before. So this is both the most expensive and largest file size camera I've ever worked with. So I was curious how big the files were. So I dug in a little bit, and in doing so, here's what I discovered. So the file sizes are pretty enormous if you're using uncompressed 16-bit RAW. 209 megabytes, give or take a little bit per RAW file. The lossless compressed is 135 megabytes approximately, and the compressed is 72 megabytes. So even that is quite a bit larger than the files out of my XH2S, which makes sense because that's a 26 megapixel sensor. So some things inspired by the X100SII. There's a whole bunch of things. First of all, the overall look is very similar. And then we get the view switch, the view toggle there. Because this camera does not have the hybrid viewfinder of the X100 series, this has a little bit different function. It toggles between different views for the digital teleconverter as well as for the aspect ratio. So I'll talk more about that in a minute. So like the X100 series, this has a shutter speed dial, and you raise this shutter speed dial ring, you pull up and rotate, and that will change the ISO. You can also see the new design language here for the treatment of the metal knobs. They've got knobs and dials. They have a different metal pattern, which is really cool. It looks like it'd be rough, but it's smooth. It's really nice. It's got a very high-end feel to it. It's pretty fun. So what else is new in here? So for the first time, we've got silver in GFX cameras, which is kind of fun. Silver and black. I had a chance to check the silver one out, which looks like this. You've seen it a couple times. And then now we have a fixed lens. This is the first rangefinder GFX camera with a fixed lens. So it's a 35mm f4. So let's talk a little bit about the things that are missing from this camera. So one of the things that's missing is image stabilization, both in the lens, so there's no optical image stabilization, as well as there's no in-body image stabilization in the sensor. So doing an educated guess, I'm anticipating the reason those features were not included in this camera, as well as the omission of the hybrid viewfinder that's found in the X100 series, is due to cost and size and weight. So including a faster lens would make it heavier and more expensive. Including image stabilization both in the lens and in the body would also make it deeper, larger, and more expensive. So I'm thinking all those things led to the C word that all us photographers hate, the compromise word. So there's no perfect cameras, and I think the GFX100RF is trying to do some new things for Fujifilm. We'll see how it works. It's a fun camera. I'll talk more about using it in a second. So another new feature in the GFX100RF is the aspect ratio dial. We've had aspect ratio for a while in Fujifilm cameras, and especially in the GFX series, they've had a bunch of different aspect ratios. But now we get a dedicated dial for that, which leads to some interesting ways to more quickly access different aspect ratios so you can experiment with some different compositions. So all the aspects that are present are here: 1:1, 3:2, 4:3, 5:4, so on and so forth. So there's, I believe, 7 or 8 plus a custom setting. You can create your own aspect ratio if you want, I believe. So that would be kind of fun potentially. Here's how it works in practice. So here's a 65:24 aspect ratio. Here's 1:1. So it's a neat way to preview, compose, see your photo in a different way before you click and then have to remember what you wanted to do when you get into software if you want to crop it there. There's a new digital teleconverter lever, a thing to switch the digital teleconverter. Again, we've had this feature in previous Fujifilm cameras, but now we have a dedicated lever for it. It's on the front of the camera. It's below the front command wheel. So it's really easy to use, and it's go to the one direction will make it increase the digital teleconverter, go the other direction will decrease it. So the 4 teleconverter lenses you have are the 35mm, which is the built-in lens, the standard optical lens, 45, 63, and 80. The equivalents in 35mm focal perspective are 28, 35, 50, and 63. Here's how that works. So again, you get this preview, or you have the option to have this preview in camera as you're composing. So at 35mm, you would see it as normal. And then you have the option with the view lever on the front to change this to, I can actually see it cropped already to 80 millimeters, or I can have a white overlay showing that, or I can have a transparent black borders that shows the middle section clear and the outer sections hidden a little bit, so you can, again, aid with composition at these digital teleconverter focal lengths. So the image sizes with the digital teleconverter, I did a little experimenting here just to see what the pixel resolution you get when you do the different teleconverter uses. So the 35 millimeter, obviously you get the full 102 megapixels. At 45, you're still at 62 megapixels, and then you're at 31 megapixels with a 63 millimeter digital teleconverter. And the 80 millimeter, you still end up with a 20 megapixel file, which is not all that much less than my X-H2S, which is pretty impressive. So that's, I think, interesting to be aware of, so that you know what you're getting with these digital teleconverters. So next, I thought I'd share a little bit of the experience of using the camera. And again, I had 2 sessions with the camera where I got to go out and make photos. One was a street photography day in downtown Bellevue, and the second was a weekend morning when we had some fog, and I went to Marymore Park in Redmond and the Sammamish Landing Park along Lake Sammamish in Sammamish. So a lot of Sammamishes there. That's where I live. So those are my experiences using the camera, and I wanted again to show you a little bit of how the camera looks. So I'm going to use my friend Emily, my coworker Emily from Kenmore Camera, and Don, who let me make some photos of them while we were prepping our in-store promo video for this camera. So I'll give you a little bit of taste of the holding the camera with their assistance here. So here we go with that. So again, we've got a more square camera, and this is how it looks when Emily's holding it. So you can see you've got a little bit of a grip, so that's quite nice. And it fits nicely in hand. I think actually that extra height is going to be very nice for most people. You don't have your hand slipping around the bottom of the camera with that extra height. You do need to kind of cradle it somehow if you're using 2 hands, and it looks a little bit like this. It does have an articulated screen, although to me, again, I think this was a cost-saving thing. When you're shooting vertical, as long as you're at waist height or above for vertical, the lack of any vertical articulation is not that big a thing. But I wish, because on the XT3 series, you have the vertical articulation where you could do this in vertical. So when you were down lower, it was really, really nice to have that. I know when I was doing some vertical photos with the GFX100RF down low, I was kind of guessing, hoping, praying a little bit on the photos and had to do a lot of check and then re-photograph. But again, that's the compromise. Size, weight, cost is adding that kind of articulation is going to add some complexity to the camera. Let's talk a little bit about autofocus performance in this camera. Again, I didn't have a ton of opportunity to use it, but in street photography, it did excellent. The autofocus, if you've ever used the X100 series cameras or the 27 millimeter pancake lens from Fujifilm, the XF27 2.8, the autofocus feels a lot like those lenses. It's a little hunty, I call it hunty, where it's doing that notion every time it focuses. It's very quick, it's really quiet, but it does make a little sound. Also, it does take a little bit longer, and again, it's just half a heartbeat longer than I'm used to with most of the lenses on my X-H2S. Again, it's just the nature of that 102 megapixel sensor, the data readout speed, communicating with the processor, all the electronic magic that happens there that I don't really understand how it works, but I'm glad it does. So one thing I did notice was I did have an opportunity when I went to a park, it's Juanita Beach Park, and was walking around trying to do a Seattle skyline photo. It wasn't great light, but there was a juvenile bald eagle flying around, and he landed in a tree, or she landed in a tree, and I set the digital teleconverter to the 80 millimeter setting and tried to make a few photos. I did turn on the bird subject detection, and it didn't do a great job, to be honest. Again, this is also another caveat. This is a pre-release camera with pre-release software. So I do need to say that. It did not do as well as my XH2S with the 16 to 80 millimeter, but again, apples and oranges a little bit. They're not designed for the same purpose. Here's the photo from that. Let me show you that. So 80 millimeter, so you get a 5120 by 3416 image size. It did find the bird. It did eventually autofocus on it, but it obviously this is super challenging. All those branches are getting in the way of the bird's eye that it's trying to find. But my XH2S did do it. So I know it's possible, but I also know that when you're dealing with 102 megapixels, you're dealing with different math. Next, I'll share some photos from street photography in Bellevue and that foggy morning near Lake Washington and Lake Sammamish. So before I talk about that, I want to talk about settings on this. So I accidentally discovered as I was doing the file size test that for whatever reason, the raw files from the GFX100RF can be read in Photoshop and Lightroom. I've never experienced that in a pre-release camera where you can use the raw files. So I set the camera up to do that, and then I had a couple days where I was doing some photos on studio, and then I was going to take it out on a Wednesday. Note to self, always check the settings when someone else has had access to your camera. So the street photography photos you're going to see are JPEGs. Someone changed the settings. Instead of being a RAW and a JPEG, they just changed it to JPEGs, backing up instead of creating two photos. So the street photography are JPEGs. When we get to the nature photos, the landscape photos, those will be raw, edited RAWs. Again, the street photos, they're JPEGs, and I set the camera to classic chrome, and then I did make Lightroom edits as well. So let's take a look at the photos. I'll talk about my experience using the camera for these photo situations. So here we go. Even in a JPEG, you've got lots of dynamic range. That's one of the claims to fame of this sensor, the 102 megapixel sensors, tons and tons of dynamic range. So I pushed and pulled the shadows and highlights here a little bit on the building to get this, I hope, dramatic look at this high-rise apartment building, condo building. So you've got, I hope, a neat look. When I was editing these photos, it didn't feel dramatically different from editing photos from my XH2S in terms of dynamic range, but I didn't have any really super high dynamic range situations. So stay tuned if I get another chance to use the camera. Easy to use. I'm not really good at seeing at 28 millimeters. It's not one of my preferred focal lengths, but it's good to try something different. One of the things I realized I was doing was walking places that I've been a lot of times before with my 16 to 80, my zoom lens. So it's kind of fun to experience it in a new way with a new focal length, but also know where the photos are. So I knew I can make some photos, hopefully, for this video. So 28 millimeters, these are all at the, 35 millimeter, which is 28 equivalent. The crop factor works the opposite direction on the large format sensor. But again, I've made these photos before with my XH2S and the 16 to 80, and these look a lot like that. Colors are amazing. Again, these are JPEGs. I pushed them a little bit in Lightroom to get the look I like. It's Fujifilm stuff. It was easy to pick up this camera and use it like any other Fujifilm camera I've used, which is kind of fun. This photo, I anticipated I would be able to crop it a lot. I was walking by, this lady was shielding her eyes from the sun in the Starbucks, and I didn't want to disrupt her and have her notice me, so I just was walking by, made this one photo. But with that 102 megapixels, you have lots of room to crop, which is kind of fun. That's new. So visualizing, I didn't have time to do the digital teleconverter. I wanted to have both options. When you do use the digital teleconverter, it does crop and you have a smaller image to work with. Whereas if you're not using the digital teleconverter, you have all the crop in post that you want to make, and you have the original as well. So it's nice to have these options. Getting a little artsy with just a truck here. I wanted to play with bokeh a little bit, depth of field look. F4, from what I understand, on large format sensors like this, is equivalent probably to a 2.8 on a 35 millimeter. So yeah, I like it. Again, good darks, good highlights, good colors, lots of dynamic range here. It feels good. Another close-up. The lens focus is pretty close. I want to say about 3 inches, so that's fun to play with. I like minimalist compositions and lots of textures, so this lens does a nice job for that. So in these two photos, I wanted to just play with focusing on the two near and far and show how depth of field is rendered. I didn't have any opportunities with the typical bokeh balls, the blurry balls of light, but I think this gives you an idea of what you can expect with depth of field rendering with this lens. Headed over to the park. This is at Marymore Park on a foggy morning, playing again with the close focus capabilities of this lens. This is not cropped very much. I think I maybe cropped just a little bit for a distraction in the lower left corner, but these are edited RAW files. So again, my recipe is in camera. I have classic chrome on, and then I apply that film simulation in Lightroom Classic and then add my edits on top of that. So that's what you're going to see next. Oh, it was fun to photograph this morning. And I feel like, just the teeniest of bits, there's some kind of a little bit extra secret magic in the rendering of these photos versus my X-H2S. I have photographed many foggy mornings in this park, and these have a little different vibe. It's really hard to articulate it. There's a little depth of something, a little, I don't know what, but there's a little something extra in these photos that I think I can see, or it could be wishful thinking. Could be confirmation bias. I think that's what they call it. Again, a few more photos from here. Playing with aspect ratio. This is 17:6 on this scene with the apple tree and get ready to blossom again. Then at the Sammamish Landing Park, where the fog obscured the horizon. I love days like this. It was interesting. This is how you know you're a photographer when you go to places like this. It was pretty early in the morning. Well, for a weekend morning, I think it was about 9:30. Well, actually, it was earlier than that because sunrise hadn't happened yet. So it was probably about 8 o'clock. There weren't any other people at the park that I noticed, but they started to show up a little bit. And a couple people walked out on the pier with me, this little dock, and, oh, there's nothing to see. And I go, I know, it's been lovely. So I guess we have different expectations as photographers of what we're looking at when we go out to photograph. So anyway, okay, back to the photos. So I just love the quiet. Got some birds in the scene as well. This one was taken off, and I really like this capture, this quiet moment. A little bit of the sun, just the blue sky just starting to come into the scene. What I like about this is you don't see the houses, you don't see the boat docks as much. It's just a nice quiet scene. Playing a little bit with composition, and again, a depth of field rendering with this lens. Trying some different things, getting used to this focal length, which is different for me. Again, gentleman at the end of the dock, I thought I'd take his picture of him taking a picture, and then go for some symmetry on the left. Again, the photo on the left, I'm down relatively low with the camera in vertical orientation, and it was kind of hard to make this composition without the ability to have the lens the rear screen articulate vertically. So you have to kind of make a guess and make a few photos and double check what you're doing. So I do wish the screen articulated vertically, but it doesn't, and I'll be okay with it. A few more quiet scenes. I can't get enough of this blue. I just really like this look, sorry. And again, here's a 65:24 crop, aspect ratio, I should say. So the neat thing is, again, when you capture these RAW files, full image is still there. If you activate crop mode, you will see the whole thing is there. It will just show you ahead of time this presentation in the crop that you selected, the aspect ratio you selected. And one more 65:24 view of the shoreline and the fog to nothingness. So there you go. So what do I think about this? It's an interesting camera for sure. I'll be curious to see the different use cases for it, because this is an interesting combination of GFX and X100, And I'm not 100% sure where the market is for this camera. I know there is one, but at $48.99, I'll confirm the price down below if that is incorrect. It's not an inexpensive camera for sure, but it is the least expensive GFX camera. So again, compromises. It'll be interesting to see. My experience using the camera, it was a lot like using any of the other Fujifilm cameras I've used. It was a lot of fun. Autofocus does what it does, just like the X100 cameras. It's very similar autofocus experience. I did not do any video with this camera. It does do 4K 30, but I did not have any opportunity to make any video with this camera. So your mileage will vary on that. But it's an interesting camera. If you're interested in asking me some questions again about things I didn't cover in this video, please leave a comment down below. So I know this camera goes on sale today, which is the 20th of March. I don't know when the in-store date of the camera will be. If I have that information, or as soon as I get that information, I'll update the description down below to include that. Also, I do know that at Kenmore Camera, if you get an opportunity, we will be having an in-store first look day of the camera on April 18th from 2 o'clock to 5 p.m. I'll be there, so you can ask me some questions. You can also ask Luis Navarro, who's the tech rep from Fujifilm. I'm pretty sure he's going to be there. He'll be answering all the questions you might have if you get a chance to come on down if you're in the Seattle area. Love to see you. Say hello. So that's what I know about this camera so far. My first thoughts, first impressions. It's a neat camera. It's one of those cameras you have to experience. I apologize I didn't say this sooner. It is amazingly well built. It feels like a next level of quality. Everything is just very, very fun to touch and turn and move. One of the sales reps, when we put it in his hands, one of the sales folks at Kenmore, he didn't know the price yet. And I said, how much? And he said, $5,000. I was like, yep, it's about $5,000. So it feels like a $5,000 camera. It's well made. It's got a presence to it. It's fun to use. The image quality is amazing. So it's up to you to decide whether it's for you. So there you go. Again, thanks for watching the video. I hope it's been helpful information here. I look forward to seeing you in a future video. I hope you all are doing well. So until I see you in that future video, I hope you stay safe, stay well, and have fun creating photos. Bye for now.